All right, welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. Today we're talking about Love is Blind, season 6, episodes 3 and 4. And today I have return guests. Okay, Maria, I've been practicing for this for the last 5 minutes. Maria Stoyadinova. Closer?
Yeah, that's very good. It's Stoyadinova, but that's like pretty close. Good job. I appreciate it.
You know what? By round 3, someday we'll have a round 3 on the podcast and I'll be like, nailed it. Or I'll just, not. And we'll anyway, hi, welcome back.
Thank you
Why
so
don't
much for having me. Yeah, I was so excited. I like kind of invited myself on this episode because I saw you post on Instagram that you're looking for guests for Love is Blind, and I got so excited. I messaged you immediately, like me.
maybe totally. And then when I saw your message, because it's like I was like, oh, I was thinking about new guests, and then we had so much fun last time when we talked about Survivor. I was like, yes, let's do it again. But for folks who didn't listen to our episode that we did on Survivor last season of this podcast, why don't you introduce yourself so they know where you're coming from?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Stoyadinova. I am a burnout coach for women, and I coach women on sort of handling the internal or treating the internal sources of burnout. So I always say, like, there's plenty of external stuff causing burnout, right? Like systems around us and workplaces and responsibilities. And in addition to those, there's like internal sources like people pleasing and perfectionism and like all the ways we pressure ourselves and all the ways in which we like can't relax or we like shame ourselves when we are relaxing. Those are the types of things that I work with clients on resolving and sort of helping them get more control of their lives, feel better, allow themselves to rest and relax, all the things. And I also have a podcast with a fellow coach who was supposed to be with us today, and she got a sore throat and couldn't join us, which is very sad. But her name is Natasha Tekestia, and our podcast is called Making Work Fun. So it's for anyone who's struggling with any work issues, anything work related, which I'm sure is a lot of people. Check out Making Work Fun with Maria and Natasha.
Yes, and I'll have the link in the show notes for the podcast too. Yeah, I was so bummed. I was like, Natasha, no,
I
but
know, I was
we'll
very sad.
find
It
a
was
way.
so fun. Yeah.
So yeah, so you jumped right on this when you saw this. So like, tell me about your history with watching Love is Blind.
So unlike the last time when I was talking to you about Survivor, and that morning was the first time I ever saw an episode of the show, with Love is Blind, I have a long history. I think I've watched every season. We're on 6, right?
Yeah.
I can't say I remember like what happened in every season, but I'm pretty sure I've watched every single season. Um, and I was like actively waiting for it to come out. I have that type. That's one of the reality shows where I get really invested in and really engaged in. So that's why I jumped on the opportunity when I saw you advertising Love is Blind.
I know. I know. Same over here. We have watched from the beginning. We're like, what is this? And then immediately we're like, this is a train wreck. Let's watch.
Yes.
Um, so like right now we're going to talk about episodes 3 and 4. Emotionally, I'm already at the altar because I've been watching ahead and I know you're on the train to get there. So we're going to try to focus on 3 and 4. But we are humans who are excited about a show, so we might drop a few things. So I apologize if you're listening and there are spoilers, but by nature we're going to talk about what happens on the show and we're going to look at it from, a kind of mental health life coaching perspective. So oh, there's so much to talk about. Shall we go? Are you
Yes.
ready?
Yes, please. Let's dive into it. Love it.
Okay, so 3 and 4 still has us in the pods. During these episodes, we see a few engagements. We see Johnny and Amy, Ken and Brittany, AD and Clay. And where they leave us at the end of this episode is we have this love quadrangle, triangle with Jess, Jimmy, Chelsea, and Trevor. And where we ended is kind of a will they or won't they with Jimmy and Chelsea. So we end on a cliffhanger. I know you're ahead and I'm ahead, so we know what happens. But dear listener, if you are not quite there yet, we ended on a cliffhanger. So lots happened. There's so much to talk about, but like, what is something that stood out for you from these episodes?
Yeah, so I mean, a number of things, and I'm sure we'll delve into them. One is I don't know if this is specific to this season or if that they did that in previous seasons too, but I kind of feel like editorially they're setting us up to root for some couples over other couples because
Mm.
they don't. I for instance like was confused about who some people were in episode 3 because I don't think I saw them until episode 3, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like in the past they were setting up all the successful couples from early on. Here they've set up a few couples and then they've introduced some couples like as late as episodes 3 and 4. And I was very confused. I'm like, wait, are these one of the successful ones? Are we rooting for them? What's happening? Did you have sort of the same impression or is it just me?
No, I don't think it's just you. I do think they've changed something in editing.
Mm.
Um, because I think at first they were like, oh, this is a cool experiment. Let's show the storylines and draw, like very straightforward storytelling. And now I feel like they're more like, ooh, people love the drama way more. And so
Yeah.
that's the angle they're coming from. So honestly, when Johnny and Amy got engaged, I was like, wait, who are these people? Like, who are
Same.
you? You're adorable, but are you on this show or did you like just get dropped in from another season? Like, it was very jarring. Theirs specifically was jarring to me. But like, who else did you like? Ken and Brittany were a little bit that way too.
Those two, exactly those two. Yeah, Johnny and Amy. I literally wrote in my notes, who? Question mark. I'm like, who are these people again? Exactly, because I was just so confused. And they're yeah, like you said, they're cute and it seems like a good couple, but I just wasn't nearly as invested in them because I didn't see like any of
Mhm.
the backstory. So that was just one thing I noticed. The other thing is just like some men are annoying is my second topic that's coming to mind.
Okay.
Some of the men on the show are really bugging me. Well, I think that's the case every season, but I don't
Any in
know.
particular?
Well, the our friend, what is his name? I'm terrible with the names this season too, so I'm just checking my notes every time I try to say a name. Jimmy. Jimmy is the one who was particularly, I think, irritating in those two episodes. We can unpack that, and I'll explain why I feel this way. But
I would love to unpack that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so funny because I keep getting torn between do I root for this person? Wait, are they a villain? Like, are they a bad person? Are they, and I think and maybe that speaks to the editing is like
mm,
for some of the people on the show, it's no like straightforward black and white. This is a good person. They're here for the right reasons, and this is like quote unquote a bad person. They're not here for the right reasons, or they're doing things wrong or whatever. And I think in previous seasons it seemed maybe a little bit more
mm,
transparent on that front, but here it's like a little bit more nuanced because
yeah.
yes, yeah. What do you think about that though?
I totally agree. I don't think, I mean, when I say Jim is irritating me, I'm not saying like terrible person. I'm just
Right.
saying there's some things that are annoying me. I totally agree with you. I think in previous seasons, the way they did the editing, there were more clear villains. Like I remember Irina was like set up as a clear
Mm,
villain and she was very annoying, doing some like very uncool things. In this season, I think the closest we get to that, but he drops out very early on is Matthew, who's
right.
set up as just strange and disrespectful. I think like the disrespectful part is what bugged me. Like the strange part of me, okay, sure, that's entertaining. He's odd. He wants to ask questions, but doesn't want to hear other people's answers. That was just bizarre. But I don't know. I just felt like I didn't feel like he was coming into this from the perspective of I want to get to know these people. I'm being respectful to them. He was more like I have my agenda, and also I'm somehow the underdog, and America will root for me. It was very strange the way I don't know if that's how it came out or that's how the editing portrayed him, but he's sort of the closest I can see as a
Yeah.
this season. Yeah.
I would agree on that. And it's interesting because I looked up a little bit of his backstory later because I was like, wait, who is this guy? And he was, and of course, when he's doing an interview, he's going to paint himself in a great, really good light. But he was talking about how what they didn't show on the show was that he is sober. And unlike some of his other fellow castmates, wasn't, like lubing up with a little bit of a drink. And so I think I would have wanted to know that a little bit because I do think that maybe for some of them, the going into it, maybe they were a little bit anxious, maybe they were drinking a little bit more, made them a little bit more chatty, or more like what you would get at a bar scene. And maybe this is the first time he was dating after stopping drinking or something, and it was like,
Mm.
oh wow, this is different sober. Like
Yeah.
that part maybe was missed out, and so I do feel like I'm giving him a little bit more grace now because I'm like, I understand that in editing they don't have the luxury of telling everybody's full
Yeah.
story and they have to follow certain narratives, but I was just like, okay, well, I could relate to that if I'd always drank and tried to date then switch things up. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. I think, yeah, just editorially they were setting him up as the villain, and I do think he was being disrespectful, but I can also relate to some things. Obviously, there's nuance always. It's not
Mm.
just terrible or just great. I'm an introvert. I can imagine myself being super awkward in this situation that you're thrown into. It's you're dating multiple people, you're living with multiple people, there's cameras in your face. It's like all very strange situation. So I can imagine myself being extremely weird in that situation. So I have sympathy for that for sure.
Oh, I know I would for sure say weird things and just be like, oh
100%.
no, that's the thing they're going to put on TV. Oh man. Okay. I have a general question to start with.
Yes.
Like, okay, so couples meet through the pods, and the idea is like, okay, looks should not matter. But like, do you think that we get a choice in who we're attracted to, like physically, emotionally, or do you think some of that is like more meeting of humans, like
Hmm.
out of our control a little bit?
It's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think there are some sort of physical things that we are just naturally more attracted to, like some traits that some people like, other people don't. I think that's there. It's not like it's not there, but I do think socialization also plays a massive role.
Mm.
So just even thinking about what kind of body, especially like female bodies, because that's what we usually talk about, are kind of trendy and they get shown to people a lot more and people see them their whole lives a lot more and then they associate that with attractiveness. And throughout history, we've seen how that's been very
Yeah.
different in different periods of history. So I think socialization does play a huge part. And you can even feel like it's no, this is just my natural preference, but it's your natural preference because you've lived for X number of years in this culture, if that makes sense. So I think
Yeah.
there's a little bit of both. And then on top of that, on the personal, like that's just culturally. On the personal side, I think there is a lot with like obviously emotional connection extremely important
Mm.
and be clicking with a person on a personality level. And when you really click with a person, that contributes to physical attraction too, I think. So I think it's just it's a combination of things. It's very hard to say like one thing matters more than another. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is something I've thought about for several years because when I first went through coach training, there was this idea that you could change your thoughts to become more attracted to somebody. Um, and I was like, maybe, but I think that's like so one-sided to just say like, oh, well, this person that I don't know about, like I'm just going to change my thoughts. Like that just seems a little bit toxic to see it from that
Right.
perspective. But like as you were talking, I was like, how would things change if they each had each other's, like if they could only hear each other, but then also had an article of clothing to sniff? Like, because I think that there's been a lot of studies done about like pheromones and like smelling like other people's sweat and that kind of thing. I was like, I wonder if anything would have changed if, say, right before I don't know, Chelsea was gonna pick between Trevor and Jimmy. It's just like, well, here's their gym shirts. Like, here you go. Like, would that have mattered at all? I don't know. I mean, to your point, I think there's so many different aspects of attraction that that choice is like, I don't know, like if I had to put a percent on it, like I don't even know. Like I think there's some sort of inclination, but it could be as simple as they think they're attracted to each other by voice and then they get out of the pods and then somebody wrinkles their nose in a weird way and it's like, ew, no,
Yeah.
gross. Weird nose.
Totally. No, and the human brain, as we know, is just so complex. It's very hard to be like, this one thing matters, this one thing doesn't, because I don't disagree that with your thoughts, you could change your level of attraction to someone, but I also don't think that it's 100% you're like only that. There's also a biological aspect, there's also a social aspect,
Yeah.
and they all play together. So it's very difficult to be like, well, 10% is this, 20% is this, or something. And you're
Right.
right, there's like the pheromones, there's just the whatever is sort of annoying you. And like you said, if someone just makes a weird sound or something, that definitely influences attraction, especially early on if you're like don't know this person and that is kind
Mhm.
of ingrained in your brain now, like you're associating something weird with that person. All of these things can matter. It's very tricky.
Yeah. Is this tricky? Have you had this experience of watching the show where, obviously because we can see people that you're like, if they are in a love triangle, you're like, oh, you should definitely go with that person. I think you're going to be more attracted to that person than this person.
I haven't thought of that except maybe this time with Jimmy, who was just so unbelievably excited about the prospect of dating someone who looks like Megan Fox that I was like, well, if one of the two looks more like Megan Fox, I think it's Chaz. Only this time did I have that thought. Otherwise, no, I have had that thought, but not in terms of like physical appearance, more in terms of I think you would like click better with this person just personality wise. Um, so in terms of looks, that's the other thing about this show. It's hilarious, but they're also like conventionally attractive. Like everybody
Right.
who goes through that show is very conventionally attractive. So it's very hard to be like, I don't know, this you're definitely not gonna like this person. That's where, of course, it boils down to personal preferences.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for indulging me on that question because I was just like, like, is it really a choice thing? I don't know. I don't know. I think you're right. I think there's so many different aspects
Complicated
to it. How could
the
you even nail it
answer.
down?
Yeah.
All right. So, what specifically from these episodes do you want to like? What do you have on your notes? Because I know you have juicy notes over there that you want to dig into.
So I got a couple of things. Some with the Clay. I think a lot of the conversations in these two episodes were Clay AD and then Jimmy with Jess and Chelsea.
Hmm.
So I don't know, with maybe we could get the Clay AD stuff out of the way and then dive into the quadrangle is what did we call it? The love
The
quadrangle.
square, the square.
Yeah, the
Yeah, so
Clay
clear.
Yeah, the Clay D situation was interesting. I have like a few notes there with, well, one thing was like a red flag, and I don't know if that came up in three or it might have even been in two, but with when Clay had this like very visceral reaction to her saying she has a connection with someone else, I was like, don't love that. Because I think his reaction was like compounded by the fact that it was Matthew and he was seeing himself as so different from Matthew. So I to some extent get it, but I also was like, this is literally why you're in this experiment to make connections with multiple people and then decide. So for you to have this kind of, I just got a whiff of like the sort of possessiveness and like controlling a little bit. And I was like, don't love that. I don't know what did you think about that situation?
Yeah, if I had only seen that episode and only had that impression of Clay, I think I would have been like, whoa, walk away, red flag. And I'm pretty sure actually watching the episode, I was like, whoa, no, 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 no,
Mhm.
no, no, no. This is never going to work out. But I did think it was interesting how they came back around and talked through the situation. And they actually talked about it because I think sometimes you see different examples on the show of couples who are like, don't really talk through a situation and figure out how to make amends. They're just like, sorry, sorry, okay, carry on. But then they keep repeating the same pattern over and over again. And I really felt like for Clay and AD, like he talked about why he had the reaction that he did. He was just like, okay, well, I heard about Matthew and and
Mhm.
he was, I thought they like both actually listened to each other and brought up points about why they reacted the way they did and how what they were going to do about it. So it was good to see the other side of this because I thought that they were both invested enough in each other to actually figure out what had happened there and why they reacted the way they did. Um, we haven't seen any other examples of Clay responding in that way. So I don't know if this was like him showing signs of possessiveness or if this was like, I am stressed. This is all new to me. Oh my gosh, another person, like, some sort of reaction that was amplified because of both Matthew and all of the other elements going on there. I want to be generous and give him the benefit of the doubt that it was just like one of those moments for him that he reacted to things. So yeah, I guess yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying like I was glad to see that there were both sides of it. If that's the only side you saw of Clay, but I think that they were both trying to work with each other to the best of their abilities in communication. I don't know, but what did you think?
I don't disagree with that. The one, I mean, I don't want to, like you said, spoil things that are yet to come in future episodes. There was another massive red flag for me with Clay later on.
Ooh.
I thought they had, yeah, after that conversation and where they talked about, where everything was coming from, and they seem to have resolved things. I was very on board with the two of them. Like, okay, my favorite couple, they're doing great. And then later on, I was like, don't love something else too, but I don't want to get
Oh
into
my
that.
gosh, you're gonna have to tell me offline. Everybody
I'll
listening
tell
is
you
like, what
offline.
is it,
Yeah,
Maria?
there was something else that was like, nope, that's a hard pass for me. But the one other thing that I want to say, and I don't know, I don't want to overly generalize because I haven't dated in 20 plus years. And so I've been with my husband for 20 years. So I don't want to be like, well, oh man, do this in dating. But I do like think there's a little bit of a gendered element there where they were talking about their feelings and where each of them was coming from. But I kind of feel like she was the only one problem solving. He was more just like, I don't know, I have feelings. That's it. Like, what are we gonna do about it? It felt like for him it was a big enough step to just admit that he had some feelings, and he was like, "This is all emotional labor I'm capable of," and she was then left with, "Okay," and then like, how do we talk it through, and what do we do with this? So I don't know. I seemed a little bit uneven there, although I do like the way they talked it through later on.
No, I think you bring up a good point there. I do think that AD is a little bit more ahead of it in terms of being able to talk through things. But you're right. I do think a lot of this is new to Clay. I mean, he talks about how coming into this, he's like, it's all looks for me, and I don't even know what this experiment was coming into it. And now it's like some when somebody like learns about and starts experiencing coaching or therapy for the first time, and they're like, whoa, which is so fun, but
Yeah.
it's also like so it's good to see that he was like open to talking about it. But you're right, like she might be the one that's carrying their relationship for quite a while.
Mhm.
Um, with her ability to be able to problem solve. And unless and that could be a pattern that they fall into for their entire relationship, which does seem uneven, like unbalanced there. What did you think, like if somebody can't really remember that scene, AD did to problem solve there?
Um, that's the thing. I don't. Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were saying Clay. I was like, I don't think he did much. I think she. Well, so number one, I think she was like doing a lot of labor to like validate him and be like,
Mm,
yes, that's like I understand, and I really love what she said. Not that she shouldn't have done that in this moment. Of course, if someone opens up and is vulnerable, you should absolutely do that. And I love one of her quotes, which was that she would have been like way more concerned if he hadn't shown any emotion. Like that would have been the weakness that she perceived, which I 100% agree with. Like if someone
yeah.
like, I don't know, I never cry, blah, 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 like that would have been for me way weaker and sort of less mature. So I really loved that she said that. I don't know, I think the labor that she was doing and the problem solving she was doing is she was like sort of contextualizing it in this way, validating him and sort of I don't know, coming up, it seemed to me like coming up more with a plan of like, okay, well, like we need to talk things through in the future. Like I could see the gears in her head turning a lot more than him. He was just like, I had feelings. And she was like, okay, here's what we do with it.
Yeah, and like it'll be interesting to see as they go along. Yeah, like what roles they play in things.
Yeah.
If she kind of has to step into more of that leadership role, if it then changes the dynamic of their relationship. It's so interesting because besides them having this stuff about Matthew, like I still feel like a lot of their conversations are more like surface level, like platitudes, like, oh, I like you, I like you, I like you. So it's kind of hard to even gauge things sometimes because it's like general surface level. And then we have this disagreement or this like scuffle that they have that they work through. And it doesn't seem like there's in between. And I'm like, what are we basing the relationship off of? Like, what is there to go on? You guys show a lot of affection for each other, but like, what is your life going to look like? And like, how do you fit into each other's lives? And like, what do you have that's actually in common other than liking the sound of each other's voices? And that part's kind of missed for me. And I mean, that to me is more of an editing thing because obviously they talked about quite a bit in there, but I was like, okay. It's hard for me to say, like what you're saying, like the couples to root for. It's hard for me to know if I should root for them because I feel like there's a lot of missing context on what I'm actually rooting for.
Hmm. No, that's totally true. And I don't know if it's only editing or if it's like I think in some cases it might be just especially while you're still in the pods, you really want to get to that next step and get engaged. So you're trying to, which is, I don't think it's a great idea, because if you're getting engaged to someone, you should get into some of the heavy stuff. But
Yeah.
I think there might be some of that tendency of like, let's not get too into sort of the, if we get to a heavy conversation, we'll have it, but like, let's try to keep it light and how reassure each other about how much we like each other and move forward that way. I think that actually is like a really good segue into the Jimmy
Yeah.
Chelsea
Let's
chess
go.
situation, because I think that's literally what happened there. I mean, Jimmy is like in my notes a perfect example of what we teach clients, like how to not make a decision, which is based on like your visceral reaction in the moment as opposed to like how you want to like think about it long term. Because it felt to me like he was all in or close to all in on Jess,
Hmm.
having a great time, really liking her until she got very direct and very honest and just had a, I didn't think it was in any way disrespectful or anything. She was just direct, shared her thoughts, shared her feelings. And he came out of that conversation and was like, that was horrible. He used like very dramatic words. I'm like, that really wasn't horrible. She was just being honest, and goes into the meeting with Chelsea and tells her he loves her and is like all in on Chelsea because he's like, you make me smile and you
You're
only laugh when I
fun.
say things. Exactly. You're fun. I'm like, okay, this is exactly how you shouldn't be making decisions based on like one tough conversation or like one visceral reaction of what's my emotion in the moment. I left the chess conversation feeling this difficult emotion. I went into the Chelsea conversation feeling this good emotion. So there, like I'm done.
Oh, totally. Like to me, I don't know. This is maybe some producer action on this. It seemed like Jimmy always saw Chelsea right after Jess. Like he's like shell shocked. He's going in the room and he's all like, like, I can't talk about what just happened, but something just happens. I can't really be fully present. And that was kind of what I got from him is like it took him a while before he could actually be like, oh yeah, I'm in the room with Chelsea, not like still back in the room with Jess in my mind. Um, yeah, he really did seem like he was in reaction to like I can respect that somebody's making a very big decision and wants to like, weigh out their options and continue dating and seeing things through. But it was hard for me to tell if he was actually taking the time from a mindful, like thought through place, or if he was just like being wishy-washy, which is what Jess was alluding to, like, hey dude, just like make a decision here and like stop dragging people along with you. Um but yeah, I felt like it really seemed like he started leaning towards Chelsea because he was like, "Ooh, that was hard and gross with Jess. This
Right,
person's over here is fun and like wasn't as challenging for me." Which is
right.
kind of what Jess says in the episode. She's just like, maybe you need somebody that's more gentle with you.
Right, exactly. And he has this quote with Chelsea, I think, about him. I like that's the first thing I wrote down. I was like, nope. I like to lead 100% in relationships or something. Like that's not a relationship. That's just, I don't know, a dictatorship. Like it's not a partnership. Like, what does that even mean? But I think that's
Right?
literally what he meant. And he also, I think, has one quote. I don't remember the specific words he used, but something like, need someone to take care of me emotionally or something like that. I don't know if that's the exact words, but that was sort of the vibe of it. And I was like, okay, there's the difference between being emotionally supportive of a partner and never saying anything that could create a negative emotion for him. And I think he meant the latter. He was like, Jess said these things made me sad. That to me is not emotionally supportive. I'm like, well, no, that is like having these conversations is a very important part of a relationship. And I think because he's kind of at this stage, it seems like unable to have some of these deeper conversations because he just shuts down the second he starts feeling bad. I mean, again, not to spoil anything, but I think that comes out in some of the conversations after the pods too, of him just not being able to communicate. And that to me, that was like very obvious of how there's some things he wants to say, he's not saying them out loud, and then Chelsea, I think, was trying to get it out of him, and it just
Yeah.
became this whole dynamic. Yeah.
Well, and I want it makes me wonder if he is someone who often talks out things with friends, like if he has any sort of issues ever, like and so I mean, he really does kind of go into it and he's just like, "Oh, I probably shouldn't share this with Chelsea, but like how am I supposed to make sense of any of this if I can't share this with like talk about it out loud? But yeah, like this whole thing was interesting because I felt like all three of them, Jess, Chelsea, and Jimmy, were saying, "You're making me feel this. It is your responsibility for making me feel differently." And so then it's like this tug of war of how do I say something to make somebody feel good? Like, what's my responsibility here? And it like, you know, how like that's where I'm a little bit torn there because it's like Jess is both direct, but then at the end she also says like you ruined this for me. You should be ashamed for letting me feel this way. Which is like a little bit, I don't know. I mean, I in a part agree with her because maybe he did string her along a little bit longer than he would have. I do think that her having a daughter
Yeah.
was something that he wasn't willing to sign up for, wasn't ready for. So in one sense, maybe she is like right that he was creating a situation wherein she got excited, but he already knew it was a no. But I don't know. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about this.
Yeah, no, it is tricky. You're right. Like that I don't think was fully fair to say. Like you should be ashamed. That I don't think was great. Yeah, I mean, again, this is all such a weird situation they're all put into. But you are right that I think all of them, Trevor, in this whole quadrangle situation, Trevor was the most emotionally mature. He handled, I
Right.
thought, the breakup spectacularly. He was like, "Yeah, I'm really sad, but." That's what we came here to do, and good luck. I'm like, wow, go Trevor.
Yeah.
It's very mature.
Totally
But yeah,
mature.
the rest of the three of them, I do think there was like a big, to various extents, some of that element of you need to say things to make me feel good. And if I don't feel good, then it's your fault for having said the wrong things.
Totally. And it is a lot of pressure,
Mhm.
like to be like, oh, okay, in 10 days, I'm going to propose to somebody. So I get where they're coming from, where they're like, I want you to say things to help reassure me that this is the right direction to go in.
Yeah.
So, which is very like interesting because not only does Jimmy like, is he going into an experiment where at the end you have the pressure of like, okay, picking someone. Now he's picking between two people, a situation I'm sure he's never really dealt with before. And so, like, just not equipped to deal with, right? Like, just not. And I don't think they get much support there other than the other dudes in the men's quarters to talk it through. Um, and then, of course, there is when Trevor was like, oh, we're all dating each other. It's like, well, are you really getting, solid advice from your buddies back at home? Because they also have a different invested interest in this. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it is very tricky. And that reminds me also of in the women's quarters, what is her name?
Is it
The
Laura?
Laura. Yes, she's the one who gets engaged to Jeremy, right? I told you I
Yes.
with the
Yeah,
name.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
Laura, yes.
yeah.
So Laura, when Laura like tries to go and warn Jazz, which to some extent I kind of appreciated because I'm like, yeah, if I think someone is gonna get hurt, I want them to give them a heads up. But she did it in the shadiest way possible. She's just like, just trust me, go, leave now. And of course, if I was in Jess's place, I would be like, I need more information. I can't just like, what are you saying right now? You
I
can't
always
just
think I was marrying somebody, and now you're like, no.
yeah, that was a very shady way to do it. So not only like she sort of made it this anxiety inducing sort of experience for Jess, where she's now going in waiting for something bad to happen, but also not exactly knowing what. Just be honest about what you heard. If you want to warn her, just be like Chelsea just shared that he told her he loved her. So I just thought
Right.
you should know. That's all you had to say, not do this like shady thing of just trust me, just leave now. I didn't
Yeah.
know.
I didn't like that either because I agree with you. Like, share, if she felt like it was her place to share the information, okay, my friend should know this. Well, then give her the facts of what happened, but then let Jess decide what to do with that information. She's basically cutting to the chase. Like, I'm going to rip you of all options except for the one wherein you leave so you don't get hurt. And Jess is like, well, I'm going to get hurt either way. I'd at least like to go and have this final conversation with Jimmy. I do think that, I mean, it's such a vulnerable time for all of them. Jess really seemed like she was going into fight mode. She opened up vulnerably. Jimmy gives her very little to work with. And then
Mhm.
it's just kind of like, goes into fight or flight response, goes into fight and responds accordingly with him. So I think if you see that and you don't really understand what maybe she's responding to, like having them that sort of response, it would be like, wow, that was a lot. But I'm like, that totally makes sense to me. That like
Yeah.
if she was open and vulnerable, didn't hear what she wanted to hear, that she might have had a reaction to that.
Yeah, and I also think there's something switched in her when, even when she gave him that letter, which was, very sweet and that was very
Mhm.
vulnerable, even afterwards, he was like, I'm still deciding. She was still okay with it until he literally said, it's because you have a daughter. I saw like something flip in her when he said that, which very understandable. She's like, okay, that's just uncool. Like you don't, I don't know. I'm sure he thought he was being kinder by sharing that detail, but I'm not sure this was the kinder option to say that. I think she was on board with him still deciding until he said that. Did you
Yeah.
see that? I was rewatching it last night. I was like, okay, I think this is where she like flipped, and she was like, okay, kind of done.
Yeah, because I was trying to understand that whole scene because it was a little bit confusing because she's just like, no, 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 I want you to be sure
Right.
on your decision. I totally understand that. Um, but yeah, I do think that's the part where it's switched. I mean, I think what he was just basically trying to say is like, this is a bigger decision with you than with somebody like Chelsea because you have a daughter. But I think like there was something in there that switched for her. And it was almost like going into either mama bear mode or something like something happened.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, I think so.
Which is not obviously not unfair of him to think. Of course, it's a different situation when there is a child involved, but I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me the way he like sort of framed it in that moment. He's like, obviously, I'm having a harder time choosing you because of the daughter thing.
Mhm.
I don't think this needed to be said out loud. I think this was already discussed and it's already part of the decision. I just don't think this needed to be framed in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. In the words of the show, 1,000%, like 1,000% that could have been kept or just discussed with somebody else. What's interesting in all of this too is it doesn't seem like any of them are just realizing that they also have the choice to walk away. Of like, you know what? Like, if I don't feel ready for an engagement and to leave the pods with somebody and continue on in this journey, it would also be very much okay to say, you know what? I'm having a hard time making a decision here. And because of that, like, I realize that both of our futures are impacted by what I say here. And I'm going to walk away and maybe we get together outside the pods. Maybe we figure it out in that way, but this is too much for me to decide here. It doesn't seem as if that occurred to any of the three of them.
Right. That's a great point, and I think that sort of is kind of the experience a lot of people have in different situations outside of reality television too, right? Is sometimes you kind of feel stuck in a situation, but walking away just doesn't seem like sometimes it's actually not an option, but sometimes it is an option. It just doesn't occur to you as a very like a viable option. So that's sort of not unlike real life, I guess. You sort of let the emotions of the moment take over, and it kind of blocks that part of your brain that's more like problem solving and what are some other options, one of which could be to walk away.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, that doesn't seem like it's an option for him. And I also think that he has some sort of storyline going on for himself. Like when I say I love you, I am fully committed. He says this a couple of times in the episode. So he has this idea of himself like, okay, well, I'm going to commit to one of these two women and then I am in it no matter what. I am not leaving. Um, and I mean, we see this play out later, but I think there's like probably also that added pressure to him that like, well, then once I say yes to one of these people, then I also don't get any options
Yeah,
because I am the type of person who says yes and then is very loyal.
and then is committed. Yeah, that's a good point. If he has sort of this paradigm in his head of like the yes means a lot because that's sort of the ultimate commitment, even though the whole premise of the show is you can literally walk away at any moment, including at the altar, which is what most of the people do in the show historically. Yeah, you're right. It seems like he's putting that sort of extra pressure on himself to be like, I need to be super sure.
Yeah. Well, and also we haven't added the other pressure, which is who knows what kind of contract they signed going into this. I'm like, wait, actually, does Jimmy? Can he just like walk away? Or like what's at play here
Yeah.
at each stage of the game?
That's a
I don't
good
know.
question because we have seen people walk away. Like when the Urena season, obviously they broke up like mid-season. Matthew, I guess, walked away, but I don't know if there's like something in the contract where if you've already made a connection, it's trickier. If you haven't made a connection, then obviously you can just leave. I don't know what it is. That's a good point. Like we have actually no idea what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, and two, it's just like, what are they allowed to bring with them? Are they allowed to bring their contract with them? Probably not. So then they might be
Right.
guessing. Who knows?
Right. Yeah.
So there was also another part where Chelsea said, was reflecting on Trevor. Trevor said first, like, that he loved her. She
Yeah.
didn't say it back, but she comes back into the women's quarter and she said, Trevor just told me he loved me. I'm so used to guys being mean to me.
Hmm.
And I just thought it was so interesting kind of watching this for a second time and hearing that, her say that about like, if that's the perspective she's coming
Yeah.
from her earlier relationships of people being mean to her and she's not used to the experience of love. I wonder what how that impacted her actually being able to receive love from either Trevor or Jimmy if that's what she's not used to.
That's a great point. Yeah, and that was very sad to see her reactions both times when both of them said, "I love you." She had this very, very strong reaction, which of course it's a big deal, but it seemed like there was extra sort of something extra burden, emotional burden for her in hearing
Mm-hmm.
that. That's a good point, and I think that it shows up a little bit in the way she sorry, the knocking things off, in the way she communicates, because she does have a little bit more of that, the thing that Jimmy resonated with, like she's less direct, she's more kind of trying to mask how she really feels by, laughing a lot and keep trying to keep it light. Like you can tell there's more she wants to say often on the show and that she's not saying, and that kind of would make sense in the context of if she had some of those toxic relationships where people were treating her terribly, like that's a protective mechanism you develop in those situations, right? Where you don't actually say what you think and feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, I wonder how much of how she showed up was her trying to protect from, okay, somebody's eventually going to be mean to me versus this is what I really think and feel. You definitely
Hmm.
see that contrast with Jess because she's just like, well, I'm just going to say what I think and feel. And
Yes.
whether or not you like that is, take it or leave it. But yeah, I was kind of thinking about that. I'm like, if someone isn't used to another person loving them, like it does bum me out a little bit if she maybe would have gone with Trevor, who obviously is all in. There's no conflict with Trevor. He's all like, listen, I have dropped my relationships with everyone else and focusing 100% on you. You are my person. I have decided on you.
Yeah.
Um, very straightforward with everything he says, as you mentioned before, kind of the most emotionally mature one. If that was hard for Chelsea to even experience,
Mhm.
receive any of that.
Yeah, no, I think it was. I think it was hard. And the way we talked a lot about how Jimmy made the decision. I am still a little bit unclear about how she made the decision. I think for her it was pretty much Jimmy proposed first. Although she did, the way they edited it, it seemed like she had the choice of whose room to
Mm.
walk into first. So I don't know if she picked Jimmy's room first, that says something, I guess. But it sounds she was very sort of heartbroken when she was talking to Trevor later. It seemed like she was very close to like she was very close to saying yes to him. And if he had proposed first, which is what he asked, like if I had gone first, would you have said yes? And she didn't answer, which to me says probably. Um, I don't know. What do you think? How did she make that decision? I am a little bit confused. I think probably what you just said of like Trevor was just sort of more upfront and
Too
open
available.
emotionally. Yeah.
Okay, I've thought about this a lot. I also wonder if there is something along the lines of two of, Trevor's all in with her. She wasn't competing with anyone for Trevor, but when it came to Jimmy, here she has this, with Jimmy, she's
Mm,
in competition in quotes with just like this really hot girl, right? She's,
right.
let's just she looks just looks more like Megan Fox than Chelsea does,
God.
if we're being
Megan
honest.
Fox debacle.
Poor Megan Fox. She's getting
2024.
right. She's getting drug into this. Um, But I also just wonder if she's just like, oh, this is more familiar to me, because a lot of us are drawn to like what's more familiar, even if it's not healthy to us. It's
Mm.
more familiar to me to have this turbulence. It's more familiar to me to not necessarily be put first by somebody. Um, she has talked about her experience with being cheated on, and so it's like maybe it just felt more familiar to her, the whole
Yeah,
Jimmy situation. And
I
then to
think.
be
Yeah.
chosen over somebody else felt good.
I think you're spot on actually, because that is something that we do as a pattern, like not always consciously, like often subconsciously, but we do gravitate towards what's more familiar, even if it is more uncomfortable and painful ultimately. It's just where your nervous system feels more settled. It's like, I don't know what to do with this guy who's upfront and says he only picks me. I do know what to do with this guy who's wishy-washy and picking between women and not entirely sure and blah, blah, blah. Like that feels more familiar. Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
that was a big factor. Now that you say
Yeah.
it that way,
It,
yeah.
it did kind of bum me out because I'm just like, I kind of like Trevor. Like, he's,
I do too.
it's just like seems like a good guy. I could see how he would be good for her. That was definitely somebody in the pod where I'm like, no, no, you'd be happier with Trevor. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, oh, for sure. He just seems more mature, not for no other reason than he seems to have done more of the emotional work to get where
Yeah.
he is than Jimmy. And Jimmy, like similarly to what I said with Clay and AD, it feels like she would need to handhold Jimmy through that journey, even though she also has her own journey to go. And so I think it will be just rockier for the two of them to try to grow together. Not that it's not possible, but it just would be tougher.
Yeah, I definitely think Trevor would have probably taken leadership if Chelsea, like, I think he would have been the AD in that situation,
Yeah,
like
the more
the one,
emotionally mature one. Yeah.
yeah, and she would have had to, like healed in the relationship essentially, like, oh, this is what it's like to have somebody that loves me unconditionally and,
Hmm.
for better or worse. But yeah, I think Jimmy was just a more familiar type of relationship for her.
I
So.
agree.
Ugh. Any other thoughts on that whole quadrangle?
Not on that quadrangle. I did want to talk a little bit. I don't know what else you have on your notes. I do want to talk a little bit about like the reveals. Not any
Yeah.
specific one, although I guess obviously Jimmy Chelsea is like the one people are talking about, but sort of how people react during the reveals. That's always been fascinating to me.
Mm.
And it's such a weird situation. I was talking to a friend about that last weekend, and she was like, well, that's when you think about it, the first time they literally have cameras in their faces. Because before that, like cameras are around, but it doesn't, you kind of get used to it and you don't feel like you're being filmed. This is the first time you actually have like a crew next to you and you have to react for the first time to seeing this person. It has to be so weird. And it's always fascinating to me to try to judge like how do people feel. Nobody obviously says it outright if they're not happy with how the other person looks, but you can tell. And so I'm just very curious to hear what you think about that whole situation.
I can't imagine like, oh, okay. So first off, if that was me, I for sure would be practicing my face in the mirror of just like, I'm just gonna be delighted no matter what, no
Exactly.
matter what. Right, because they're right up in their faces. Um, and I don't know if they talk about this in the pods ahead of time. Like, okay, so when we see each other, do you want to make out completely? Do you want to just hug, kiss on the
Mm.
cheek, or whatever? And so I think there's just like that awkwardness. There's also like this vulnerability of like, okay, well, if he gets down on one knee and hands her a ring, is she actually going to say yes at this point? If she's, or
Right.
unless she sees me and it's just like deal breaker, none. Nope. I don't know. My guest last week, Matt, said he went online and watched like a compilation, I think, of all of the reveals just to see the
Mhm.
different body language. I'm going to have to hunt that down, but I'm always like so nervous and I'm like trying to gauge based on them seeing each other for the first time if it's going to work out or not. I mean, Johnny and Amy, the lovey-dovey couple, seemed like, okay, this is just another detail, whatever.
Yeah.
And then everybody else, I mean, AD and Clay, she was just, they seemed maybe like they had chemistry. She did like a
Yeah.
little spin move that he seemed to appreciate. Ken and Brittany, I think we're just trying really hard. I don't know.
Yeah.
Jimmy and Chelsea. Oh,
Mm. There's so many memes with the review of Jimmy's face during the review that
I
tells you
know.
something.
You just never know. It's
Yeah,
funny, like in doing this podcast, because, and maybe you have this experience on your podcast, you bring on guests you've never met before. You kind
yeah,
of like scope them out on social media ahead of time to just be like, oh, what's their thing? Like, but you just like never know what
yeah,
the energy is actually going to be like when you talk to somebody. And here we are just on like computer screens across from each
right,
other. Um, and so I think about that just like in the human experience in general. Like, you just kind of never know.
right.
Uh and I do think that like energy and is like bounces off each other, and if it's just
Yeah.
not there, it's hard to drum that up. So I
Mm,
wish they had a moment to meet. I know it's like for TV and stuff, it's like it's too bad they don't have a moment just to themselves in that whole process. Maybe not right away, but like,
I
okay,
agree.
cameras off. Listen, guys, this is the first time you're seeing each other. Like, here, we'll give you a minute.
Right. Well, yeah, that wouldn't make for good reality TV, I guess.
No.
Um,
Never.
but yeah, but you're right. Like even in a very low stakes sort of situation, such as meeting someone to do a podcast, it's still I still am nervous when I'm meeting someone for the first time because I'm like, what if
Yeah.
we just chemistry is completely off and we can't even talk to each other and it's super awkward. And that's like a super low stakes situation. We're meeting each other
Yeah.
for an hour. It's okay. Then we go on with our lives. This is a much bigger stake situation. Everyone's watching you. It's a marriage situation. You're supposed to decide whether you want to marry this person in the next 4 weeks. It's so nerve-wracking. And yeah, I can't imagine how I would react. I don't know if I would be very good at like keeping my poker face on when I do the review.
I
I
don't
would
think
be
I would. I
terrible.
often wear my heart on my sleeve, so I'd probably like, ew.
Exactly. I'm like, I have a very hard time not containing how I feel in various situations. So I don't
I
know.
know. It's like I find the reveal the most cringy part of the show. Like I'm like I
For
feel most
sure.
awkward. I'm like, oh, and like they it goes on for way too long, and I'm always just like, oh. So
Mhm.
I
For
felt.
sure.
I mean, I hope Jimmy and Chelsea can kind of just laugh at themselves a little bit, because she also commented like, oh, I walked out like a T-Rex, and or
Yeah.
he made a face. He looked at his watch at one point. So I don't know.
I don't know. We'll see. Um,
Oh, well, any last thoughts before we wrap up for the day?
yeah, no, the only other thing that came to mind when you were saying, I wish they discussed in advance, like how do they want to react when they first see each other. I also wish, and I've been thinking about that a lot, and especially rewatching those 2 episodes. What was the again with the names? What was the name of the other person that Jeremy was seeing before? Sarah. Sarah, I
Oh,
have the name.
Sarah. Yes.
Yeah, where she brings up politics, and I would like that for me. And he has like a very, what I thought was, I don't know, kind of a weird reaction. I mean, at least to me, because I feel very strongly about my politics. I'm like, I don't understand how someone could be on the fence about any of those things you guys are discussing. But how do things like that not come up more often? Or maybe they're just not shown on camera. If you're literally getting engaged to someone, how are you not discussing your politics? Believe like all of these things, they're incredibly important. That would be one of my first questions because that's a massive deal breaker for me. I'm like, if you
Yeah.
don't have my same values, I'm out. I don't even want to go any further. So I don't know. That to me has always been super shocking of like, how are we not having more of these conversations in the pods?
I'm surely they're having them. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, there is this narrative that like love should just be enough. And I'm like,
Mm-mm.
no. I'm like,
No.
that is a part of it. But also, like, if you don't want the same things in life, if you don't have,
Mm.
complementary values, it's not like you have to believe the same things as your partner, but at least be open-minded or be able to like, you know,
Yeah.
work with each other on it. But yeah, if you never talk about that before,
Yeah.
like that would be a surprise.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. It's very confusing to me. And yeah, and it's some things you can be open-minded on, I think. And there's others that are just deal breakers, at least from
Yeah.
our perspective. Like there's just like very strong values that if someone is not aligned on those, that's just a no for me. So I was just always curious. And last season that came up too with the one guy with who didn't like women wearing makeup. Like with
Oh,
him, I'm like,
right.
I think that could have been avoided if you just had one conversation about politics.
Totally. Oh man. Yeah, there have been so many things. I'm guessing they just for a lot of these just don't show them, because
Probably.
maybe I don't know. I mean, it's
I don't
They
know.
leave so much, but also I'm like, do I want to slog through that? I don't know. But yeah, they leave a lot out.
Yeah.
And they,
I
I
kind
mean, I
of
get
would,
it.
yeah. I kind of would love to see that conversation, but maybe that's just me. Maybe for others, it's like that's the boring part, and we don't want to show that.
But I do think it's a part of the conversation. Like, I mean,
Probably.
for me, it's like at this point in my life, I love being nomadic, and it would have been a deal breaker. Like,
Yeah.
initially, like it would have been hard for me to go, okay, now I'm going to be stationary. Like that would have been a thing.
Mhm.
And so, and politics, financial goals, life goals, if you want
Right.
kids or not. It seems like the only thing they really talk about or show is whether or not they want kids,
The kids,
and
yeah,
maybe
which is
some
obviously
religion,
important. Yeah, but yeah, that's
right?
true. Who knows what's edited out and what's created.
So basically, what we have accomplished in this podcast is having way more questions
Yes, than
about the whole
answers
thing.
for anyone.
Perfect. Okay, Maria, if somebody wanted to find you online, where would they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm mostly on social media, mostly on Instagram and TikTok, and my handle on both of those is rest_over_grind. So rest over grind is the name of my business. That's also my website, so restovergrind.com. And if you go to the website, there's some free resources and videos to watch, and also you can book consult call to work with me if that's something you're interested in.
Perfect. And I'll have all of those in the show notes. Well, thank you, Maria, for coming on. This has been a blast. I can tell you're just going to be a repeat guest on here because we have so much fun. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me again and indulging. I would love to come back for any time in the future.
Yay. All right. Bye for now.